Welcome back, everyone, to Elite Sports Network, and today we're going to be discussing a much debated topic: which conference is closest to rivaling the SEC? Now, it is a clear and already set in stone fact that the SEC has been the powerhouse conference for about 7 or 8 years now. They've won multiple championships in a row, dating back to about I think 2007. And they are just, they're dominating the BCS landscape. They're dominating all of college football. Everything is on the SEC. And, it's really changed football to, all it is these days is strength of schedule. What is your strength of schedule? All of the conferences, oh, you're not in the SEC, you don't have a strength of schedule. And first, I think that's, worded wrong. Because I believe that the Big 12, the ACC, the Pac, and the Big 10, who I think are the closest conferences to rivaling the SEC, you have a good strength of schedule in those conferences. It's just when compared to the SEC, it's not great. There's nothing wrong with these four conferences. Everyone's just saying Big 12, oh, they're so bad now, they're going to fall apart. Okay, yeah, they're not as good as they were when McCoy, Bradford, and Harrell were quarterbacks, back in 07, 08, but they're still a decent conference. Big 10, 1 year removed from having, 7 ranked teams. They're definitely a good conference. It's just, in these days, we're looking SEC. If you're not in the SEC, you're not in a good conference. Ohio State, terrible strength of schedule. Oregon, terrible strength of schedule. Come on. That's wrong. Oregon has played Washington, UCLA. They're going to play Stanford, Oregon State, 4 ranked teams. That's an average, that's a decent strength of schedule. It's just, once again, when compared to the SEC, that is not a good strength of schedule. So I'm here today. Which conference is the closest to rivaling the SEC? And we're going to figure that out right now. And I'm going to start by saying list of ranked teams or teams that are threats. And when I say threat, I mean they are a decent football team. Maybe not necessarily ranked, but top 30, 40 team. And, we're going to compare that to teams in the SEC. So obviously first in the Big 12, we've got Texas, TTU, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, and Baylor. I think all 5 of these teams are decent football programs that you got to watch out for this year. Obviously these 4 are ranked, so that gives you 4 ranked teams right here. So, but I'm gonna say that they are not that close to rivaling the SEC. For the Big 12 to rival the SEC, they are gonna have to have Baylor become obviously, or Texas or Oklahoma or any of these teams have to become the next Alabama, and I think, since that is your first, way to equalize the SEC is to have a Bama in your conference, I think that means it's going to be very hard for any of these conferences to really rival the SEC, because I don't see any of these 5 teams becoming an Alabama in the next couple of years. Obviously, Texas has, the potential to get there, but they're not there yet. You can equate Baylor to maybe this year's LSU or South Carolina teams. You can equate Oklahoma State or Texas Tech to this year's A&M teams in terms of rankings, not how they play, but in terms of rankings and how good they are overall. But and there's a decent set of teams right there, but when you've got 8 ranked SEC teams, Big 12, not that close to rivaling the SEC. Next, ACC. Obviously, we've got top teams such as Florida State, Miami, and Clemson. Problem is, that's where the list ends. I don't see VTech as a legitimate threat in college football, at least not now. Obviously, Florida State can rival Alabama. They're, number 2 in the nation. They cancel out Alabama. Clemson, I'd say they cancel out with LSU. Miami, they cancel out with South Carolina. And when I mean cancel out, I'm saying how can they be even with the SEC? Bama, FSU, Clemson, A&M, or Clemson, LSU, something like that. Clemson, Georgia, they beat Georgia. But then you've got all those other teams because, I don't have any room to write this, but the SEC, they have Bama, LSU, A&M, South Carolina, Georgia, Missouri, who's, up until last week, 2 weeks ago, was a legitimate title contender. A shame they had to drop out of that. But there's 6, Ole Miss, 7 decent to Florida, 8 great teams, good teams in that one conference. Those 3, not going to match up. I don't see the ACC rivaling the SEC or being the next closest. That's the key, is who's even the closest out of these 4. This is, I think, where the battle can come down to, is these 2 teams. and maybe not this year, the Big Ten, but which which conference is the closest in the next couple of years? This year and next year, and maybe 1 year within a 3-year span. Which is the closest? I don't think Texas and OU can rebuild in 1 year. They eventually maybe. Pac, obviously, Oregon is kind of in a mini dynasty of its own. Stanford is in a mini dynasty. Oregon State, UCLA, and ASU are all quality teams in the conference. I think the Pac overmatches the Big 12. I think they're better because Oregon can take Baylor, Stanford could take Oklahoma, OSU, UCLA, ASU could probably take Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, and Texas. If not, you just Oregon and Stanford. This is a very almost as top heavy as the ACC with Oregon and Stanford. Except the drop off between these 3 teams and VTech is just astronomical. But anyway, Pac, I think they have the potential, and that's another thing. USC, if they rebuild, all of a sudden you got 6 quality teams. For the Pac-12, they could rival the SEC dominance, but I would say they're that's a long shot. They could, but I don't think they're ever going to overtake the SEC. At least not now. This is all hypothetical. This is all this year and next year. Based off recruiting and all that, and just which is the closest to the SEC this year overall, and which can be next year. Now the Big Ten I think is a special case because obviously this year, if I list quality teams, there's Ohio State, Michigan, and Wisconsin. But I think this is the conference that has the potential in the next couple of years to become up there. Because, you look back, Nebraska, they could be good again. Northwestern even, they're a decent team. Then all of a sudden you've got 6 quality teams right there. And they could easily be better than the Pac, ACC, or Big 12 because Ohio State, obviously title contender. MSU, best defense in the country. Michigan, they're always up there next year. Who knows what they're recruiting, what they can do. Wisconsin, back in the top 25. These 2 teams obviously dropped off lately, but they're decent every year. So I think which conference is closest to rivaling the SEC comes down between these 2 conferences. For this year, I'm going to have to say I think the Pac is the closest to rivaling the dominance of the SEC just because Oregon and Stanford, that's 2 title Rose Bowl contenders right there. And dark horse, Arizona State, only 2 losses, depending on what happens in Palo Alto on Thursday between Stanford and Oregon. Dark horse for the Rose Bowl game. Watch out for Arizona State. I don't think they've proven themselves as a legitimate BCS Bowl team, especially with how top-heavy the rankings are right now. But Kadeem Carey, that offense can get it going. UCLA, Brett Hundley, they're definitely not a bad team either. I think they've been exposed lately by Stanford and Oregon, but that's 2 title-contending teams. So right now I'm going to say the Pac is the closest to rivaling the SEC dominance, but in the future I think the Big Ten might have the best chance because you've got quality recruiting right here. Dark horse, Penn State, they can always do work on the recruiting trail. So that's my vote for which conference is the closest to rivaling the SEC. Let me know what you guys think. This is Elite Sports Network, and thanks for watching.